All right, well, why don't we go ahead and get started? My name is Judd Choate. I'm the State Election Director for Colorado, and we are so very fortunate today to have Jennifer Morrell, who's going to talk to us about creating a culture of continuous election auditing. Why don't we go to the next slide? For those of you that would benefit from closed caption or getting the transcript, real-time transcript, feel free to click on the button for Zoom. And then also just awareness that we will be fielding some questions late in this presentation, and we'd love to have your input. So please write your questions, submit them anytime. I'll be curating them toward the end. I have my first secret question that I'll have for Jennifer, and then from there on we'll kick off viewer questions. So do very much, we do really want to see those questions. So feel free to add those, and I'll find some appropriate ones to ask Jennifer at the end of the presentation. All right, so let me tell you a little bit about our Certificate of Elections Administration program at the University of Minnesota at the Humphrey School of Public Affairs. So this is a election training program where there are a series of online courses on various topics related to the work that you do as an elections administrator, or those that want to join and become elections administrators, or frankly, people that just want to learn more about elections administration. To get the actual CEA certificate, you complete 12 credit hours, and you can do that pretty much anytime through online availability. We have courses running all the time. And for those that want to move into elections administration, we do have a strong placement record. In fact, many of the people that have been in my classes have gone on to very prominent roles in elections administration, or they were already pretty prominent elections administrators, and this has just helped them to make their role even more important. That's an email address where you can learn more. Please go there and to the CEA program at umn.edu. And just to tell you a little bit about the classes that are being taught now, the courses that we have that begin June 5th include one from Gina Roberts, who's teaching voter outreach and participation. And then, boy, isn't it great that we have Jennifer Morrell here? You get a taste of what you're in for if you were to take Jennifer's class on the Introduction to Election Security. So you get a sort of a double whammy today. You get a preview of what her class might be like, and then also the information as to how to sign up. All right, on to, oh yes, the upcoming conference. I should tell you about the upcoming conference. So in May, on May 10th of this next month, we're going to do a full day conference, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. in person at the Humphrey School, but also available online. You can sign up by going to our website. If you put in CEA HHH, so Hubert H. Humphrey, the CEA program. If you put in that, it's a very quick search to find the program, and there's lots of information about the upcoming conference. It's the title for this year is The Profession of Democracy, Elections Administration, and State Associations. And we have an all-star lineup of people who will be speakers. Oh, well, I don't know about that first guy, but the rest of them are all-stars, including Tammy Patrick, Charles Stewart's in this list, Amy Cohen, Neil Kelly. You might see Jennifer Morrell on the back end of that list right there. That's more about the order of sessions, not about the order of her prominence as a speaker. And then Matt Masterson and Matt Crane. We have an all-star group of people who will be talking during that conference. And just to give you sort of a highlight, it's about trying to understand how we can, as an industry, do a better job of of training and certifying the people that work in elections administration. And then also this relationship that having a strong state association has on creating better and more independent elections administrators. So it's this sort of combination of looking at how we can improve elections administration in a couple of different ways, through certification programs where we provide training, but then also through strong associations. And we have a number of examples of states that have strong associations that we'll talk about at that conference. So I hope that you can all join. It's going to be a great conference. It's on May 10th, and you can sign up at our website at the CEA program at the Hubert H. Humphrey School of Public Affairs. All right, well, today you are going to hear from Jennifer Morrell, who's going to talk about a culture of continuous election audits. I'm going to let Jennifer give her bio because it's long and involved with many highlights. And then Jennifer, maybe you'll take us through that, through your series of slides and ideas about auditing. And just a reminder to give us some questions and we'll field those toward the end. So let me hand it over to Jennifer.
That's great. Thanks, Judd. I'm so excited to be here with you. Let me transition to the slides, and I promise to keep the bio short and sweet. Let's see. How's that? Fantastic. Well, really a pleasure to be here today. As many of you know, I love talking about audits. I think the important things from my bio, Judd already mentioned, I'm lucky enough to be able to provide support to the CEA program at the Humphrey School. It's one of the things I just love, getting to meet existing election officials, prospective election officials who take that course wanting to think about how they might play a role in improving our elections. So that's an exciting part of some of the things I do. I think the two important things are I've worked as a local election official, so I spent time in both Utah and Colorado, in a very small office, in a medium-sized office, in a slightly larger office. I understand all of the challenges and constraints of running local elections, and you know, those challenges are real. I also got to sort of understand what it's like to innovate and get excited about new ideas in election administration. I've done some consulting work after I left my time in Arapahoe County, Colorado, focusing on audits. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And now I have this amazing opportunity to lead this awesome group, I should say co-lead, this awesome group of former state and local election officials at the elections group. And we've spent the past couple of years or so putting out some great resources to support the election community, to support all aspects of election administration. So if you haven't explored our website lately, I would encourage everybody watching to go spend some time there. We just have such a fantastic team, and I'm really proud of the work that we've done there. But I want to jump right into our audit conversation. I want to show you some pictures that at first might seem completely unrelated. So what if I told you that the key to improving confidence of our elections and improving how we administer elections lies in the same principles and techniques used to ensure the readiness of our military, the efficacy of your medications, the safety and quality of the food you eat, and the solvency of our financial institutions? I'm going to come back to that at the end of my presentation, but I want you to think about those for a bit while we're talking. So let's start. We promised in the intro that, or the promotional, I guess, piece for this presentation that we'd start from where we've been. So I wanted to take you back to 2008. That was close to the time I started working in elections. And the Brennan Center came out with a report. And in that report, it indicated that over half of states performed some type of tabulation audit. And that's exactly what I found about that time, as I was working in a small elections office. And essentially we had the canisters that were attached to our voting systems. They were DREs at the time with the VVPAT canisters. We would submit the serial numbers for all of those to the state. They would do some random selection. They would let us know which ones had been selected. And then using staff or volunteers, we would spend time unspooling those, hand counting those, comparing those to the results reported by the voting system and reporting back to the Lieutenant Governor's office. I was in Utah at the time, so they don't have a secretary. What the outcome of that was. And there wasn't much more that we did with that. And certainly during this time, if we kind of think back to that time period, there were really a few process or compliance audits that were required of jurisdictions. But in 2014, the PCA, the Presidential Commission on Election Administration, released a report, and it was the first time I remember being really excited about something. It was very useful, it was actionable, there were written recommendations that were really akin to standards of practice for elections, and it included some recommendations for audits. So first, there was a recommendation that every election should be conducted on voting equipment that produced an auditable paper record, a voter verified paper audit trail. It also suggested that states should routinely audit their polling places to determine their accessibility. So we have a hint here of a process audit or a compliance audit that should be done. And then they indicated that voting equipment should be audited after every election. And they really emphasized that the performance of that equipment needed to be evaluated, not just in prominent elections, but when election outcomes don't necessarily depend on it, meaning we should be doing it all of the time. And then they recommended that jurisdictions publish their results so that other offices that had the same equipment could promptly sort of learn about and fix those problems. So that was sort of an exciting sort of step forward into, I think, broader discussions about election audits. A huge shout out here to Verified Voting. If you haven't been on their website, I love their verifier. It's a really cool way to go back and look at a map of our country to sort of see the progression that we've made on one of those recommendations. So if you look at the snapshot, in 2008, 26% of the voting equipment used in the country were DREs without a voter verified paper audit trail. So that's all the red you kind of see there. And then if you look at today, we can see, same map, but a lot more green. Only a few pockets of red now, where only 4.4% of voting equipment used are DREs without an audible trail. So we've made some progress there. For me personally, I feel like this was at the center of my role, so maybe not as a historic moment for everybody else, but this is a picture that I enjoyed using when I first started doing training around risk limiting audits, and it came from one of my first slide decks. And this is my operations facility in Arapahoe County, Colorado in 2017. And it was taken during our very first statewide risk limiting audit, our RLA. And the reason I love this photo, and even I've left the caption on the photo as I had it all those years ago, is because in the background, we have academics, we have advocates, we have watchers, we have members of the Secretary of State's office. So Judd, I know you were there because you and I have a great photo of the two of us that was taken during the same time. We had federal partners, we had election officials visiting from other states, we had the media there. And it was a really important moment where we took an idea that was conceptual, that was research-based, and a few pilots had been done around that idea. Now we had the opportunity to see if we could really make it work at a statewide level. And maybe just as important as part of this, we started having conversations, not just about like how to perform an audit, the methods, but about why we should perform election audits. What's interesting is similar today, the conversation then was about the threats of foreign actors meddling in our elections and sowing seeds of distrust, and that trust in the way elections are conducted and in the outcome are vital. And in order to convince our strongest critics, and again, that's part of why I love this photo, because some of those critics were in the room with us that day, is that anything we do to mitigate those threats or build trust has to be validated in a way that's transparent and open to the public. So I feel like that was kind of a watershed moment where we started having like more conversations with more folks in the room, thinking about how to work on this. And so I began researching and asking people that question, why audit elections? And I've used these same 5 talking points for the past 6 years because they're still, I think, just as valid today. And that is, audits can help us detect voting system errors, whether those are human errors, which is what we see most often, misconfiguration, manipulation. Audits help us provide accountability to voters, and that's really important. By their nature, they can be a tool to help deter fraudulent activity. They help us assure that votes were issued and counted and reported accurately. And maybe most important, and the one I really like to emphasize, is that audits are a way to provide feedback for process improvements, how we get better. And so out of that research and those conversations came the 4 knowing it's right guides. That's a mouthful. Hopefully some of you have seen those. If you haven't, you're interested in RLAs, which we're not talking about today. You certainly can go take a look at some of those guides. They're on our website at the elections group, but they're still on the Democracy Fund's website. But that work led to more questions and more ideas about how we could know it was right. And as I was working with states and jurisdictions who were trying to pilot RLAs, it was clear that just auditing the tabulation equipment was not enough. And that's really what led to this 4th guide, part 4, which was about valid accounting audits. Okay, so now let's kind of fast forward where we are today. And as we look forward, we need to think about both the challenges and the opportunities. So we know that well-implemented audits ensure the accuracy of election results and speak to the integrity of the elections process. We know when they're done correctly, they can offer a way to reassure voters that their vote was counted accurately and that the election was trustworthy. And most important, post-election audits enjoy broad institutional and bipartisan support. I've talked about audits in front of so many groups from many different states and political affiliations, and everyone agrees this is an important concept that we need to be doing more with. The challenge is that election officials have been and continue to face pressure to implement ill-defined forensic audits. We know that audit implementation is receiving a higher than usual level of scrutiny. And by that, I mean, we have a lot of different players sort of advocating for different things when it comes to audits. And we know that help is needed developing and defining audit procedures and communicating the value of those to voters and other stakeholders. So, kind of pause. What does a future election audit system look like? And I've highlighted that intentionally because it's about building a system. It's not about a singular audit. What does that look like where voters and candidates and other stakeholders trust that elections are fair and legitimate, or as fair and legitimate in other states as in their own jurisdiction? I don't need to explain that. I know most of you listening hear that, right? I feel confident about my own county, my own city, my own state, but I don't know about those folks over there. And then you fill in the blank, right? So we've been at the elections group, we've been conducting some research for almost a year now. We're going to be sharing a report in the next few months that outlines all of the things that I'm going to be discussing next. But we really started by focusing on first just mapping the system to help guide the development of standards and align around a shared vision for strategy and change. So, well, we'll get to the map in a minute. We started conducting interviews and focus groups with election officials, mostly to understand their needs and the things that were blockers for them in implementing change, and then conducting some research. So we wanted to know what's already happening. We knew that internal sort of compliance audits or quality control checks were already taking place in a number of offices, but we wanted to be able to document those. And maybe out of that, identify some procedures that states could implement to mitigate some of the major mistakes that we've seen lead to misinformation. Now, this is not our systems map. This is our kind of fun way to consolidate that into essentially what many of you know. So we did take a pretty structured approach. We looked at structural, attitudinal, transactional themes. We tried to look at upstream causes and downstream effects. But ultimately, this told us what most of you already know, and that is that if we want to build an audit system, we need more money, we need more people, we need more space, we need more time. And some of those things we can fix immediately, some we cannot. But this is what I get really excited about. Mainly, we wanted to hear from election officials. We wanted them to think about what would an audit system look like if they could create it from scratch, if they could create the principles and standards and laws and requirements and the implementation process, the methods, what would those look like? So we've held a series of audit workshops. We started just by mapping out key election procedures and asking participants to consider areas that could benefit most from an audit, a test, or a quality control measure, and what those terms might mean to an election official. And we had no idea how cool our election process map would be. I think we're going to try and publish that because, you know, an election nerd, when they get in front of a big process map, they get kind of excited. So again, there's a lot of detail behind this I'm not sharing. I'm just going to give you a quick snip of the test, quality control, and the audit. Tests for us are asking the question, will it work? So this can be conducted by internal election staff to compare processes against a known or a desired outcome, especially when that outcome is frequently pass or fail. The outcome of a test is usually less formal. So whatever it's producing, it's not necessarily a public-facing report, but it might result in recommendations, revisions to a process or a form, and maybe it requires follow-up testing. In this case, a test, and the audience is really important, right? Who's getting this information or who's participating in this, this process. So test most often will be internal, will be election staff, but it also could be the public, could be observers, candidates, the media, the state election authority. So some examples include user acceptance testing of voting and tabulation equipment, mock elections to test your electronic poll books, pre and post election logic and accuracy testing, probably the one we're most familiar with, or even focus groups to test new forms or new procedures to make sure people can fill them out correctly and completely, or testing data files sent to a print vendor. Next, we have quality controls. This is where we ask, right? So we asked, will it work? Now we want to ask, is it working? Quality control measures can include activities such as inspecting things, testing things, sampling, verifying. They can be performed at various stages of each election, of each process. But the primary objective of a quality control measure is to ensure that the products or services meet the expectations. They're consistent with applicable laws and regulations and standards. And these measures are generally conducted by internal election office staff. They're really the hardest to define, but they're the one that's happening organically in lots of offices. In general, quality control measures establish the accuracy and the completeness and the integrity and validity of all these functions and processes. And the outcome could just be a completed checklist or some modification to a procedure guide or some other corrective action or feedback if it involves a staff member. Again, the audience is typically internal, but sometimes it might be your vendor or maybe poll workers or the state election authority. Essentially, it's a way that we spot check processes to make sure they're being followed correctly. And a lot of these, some examples might be just checking to see that updates have been done, pulling a sample of voter registration records and making sure updates have been done correctly. Ballot proofing is a good example of this, or checking to see if reconciliation forms were completed accurately. And then the audit is, did it work? And this is typically, or I should say ideally, should be conducted by an independent and objective third party. This could be an external auditor, it could be an internal audit team, but it's a way to provide assurance to stakeholders that the organization is operating effectively, efficiently, ethically. The main objective of an audit is that we're identifying areas of risk, we're assessing the reliability of the information that we're looking at, and remember I mentioned process improvement, we're providing recommendations for improvement. And the audit can be conducted by the elections office or by the state authority, or in some cases, third parties. But really we want to be able to discover discrepancies or verify or confirm that the results of a process meet the standards, meet the laws, meet the regulations, policies, etc. In terms of like the audience, this is where we want something that's very forward facing. The audience is the public. It's our observers, it's our oversight agencies, it's candidates, the media, and our legislative body. We're all familiar with tabulation audits. It's the best example of an audit. But there can also be process audits to determine whether staff or poll workers conform to policies or statutes. But the key here, and this is where I'm going next, is that there needs to be standards or some sort of best practice that we're auditing against or we're measuring against. So we've spent some time thinking about standards. It's kind of a boring, dry, but very, very important topic. We've spent some time looking at the generally accepted government auditing standards, otherwise known as GAGAS or the Yellow Book. We spent a lot of time looking at the voluntary voting system guidelines. Again, Judd, I know you played a role with those. We even looked at some of the NIST work around common data formats just to understand about how standards could be created, designed, developed, adopted, and implemented. Oh, okay, there we go. And this is a really weird slide, and hopefully this works, but if any of you have been to an NCSL presentation, they do a phenomenal job of showing this sort of hexagonal map of the US and all the different audit laws that are taking place in different states so that you can sort of see where there's alignment, where there's not. And I decided to steal this because as we started looking closer at where there were common practices, whether that was around standards, methods of auditing, etc., really our map looks like this. And meaning that there aren't any, right? There aren't any two single states verifying or validating their elections in exactly the same way. And just to like kind of focus that in a little bit more, we can think specifically about post-election tabulation audits. Again, if you remember, we've been doing these for a very long time. I started this presentation with the data around 2008 because that's when I came into election administration. But post-election tabulation audits have been around much longer than that. But if you look at this, this is looking currently today where we're at. We have 3 states with a requirement to do a risk limiting audit in RLA. And even that, there's some variance, right? In Virginia, the frequency at which they do those is slightly different than Rhode Island and Colorado. We have 12 states doing traditional, so where we choose a fixed percentage of precincts or ballots or districts, a traditional post-election audit with an optional RLA or a pilot RLA also happening at the same time. We have 28 states doing just a traditional post-election audit. We have 1 state that's piloting a traditional post-election audit, meaning they previously didn't perform any type, and now they're piloting, adopting some form of that fixed percentage audit. And then we have 12 states not performing any type of post-election audit. So we spent some time thinking about what standards might look like. We've borrowed some of the ideas outlined in the Yellow Book, and we think that if there's a way to sort of move the ball forward in terms of developing tests and quality control measures and audits that we all can agree on, it really needs to be principles-based. And so this is just an example where we thought maybe the first principle might be around ethics, right? Before we even get into like the where and the when and the how, maybe we should think about ethical standards that might guide the work of those who are conducting those audits. And in this case, we've highlighted here being mindful of the public interest, acting with integrity, objectivity, proper use of government information and resources, and professional behavior. Oops, going backwards. Some of the other principles, high-level principles that we have considered and will be in this report include things around independence, timeframes for audits, evidence. So that's thinking about what we collect, how we collect it, what the sample size might be, having a clearly defined scope. And this is something we heard loud and clear from the folks that we brought into our workshops that said, we are all about doing audits, What we don't want, though, is to define an audit, perform an audit, provide outcome of that audit, and then have somebody change the scope of that audit because they didn't find what they were looking for, and so they want to add some additional things, or keep sort of like performing the switch out, for lack of a better word, when we've met all of the criteria of the audit. So what we heard is nobody minds if there's a discrepancy or an issue found, expanding the sample size or investigating or looking for further evidence. But we want clear guidelines on what is being reviewed, what standards we're comparing that against. Some other things around transparency and reporting and privacy. This was a really interesting one that I hadn't thought about until we held these workshops, where the state and local election officials we brought into the workshop said, look, if we're going to be inspecting and reviewing data and other records that include information about voters or poll workers or others, we need to have some sort of principle to ensure the privacy and the safety and security of that information. And so where do we start? Because it feels like there's so much we could do there. One of the things we can learn going back to the government auditing standards, GAGAS, helped us to sort of think about that question of where to start. And that is, we want to select a process for audit. When we're selecting a process for auditing, we need to think both about the impact of a potential issue. So what are the potential consequences of a system being broken or a particular process being broken? And what's the likelihood of a system problem? So what's the probability that a problem exists? How likely is it? So using that, as we thought about like building some implementation guidelines for performing audits, quality control checks, tests. The things that rose up in sort of that were top of mind for the election officials we brought in as we were doing this mapping activity were voter list maintenance, ballot design and proofing, ballot accounting, ballot reconciliation, security practices, mail absentee ballot verification, and that includes both signature verification as well as other types, and then of course results tabulation. I don't have time today to go in detail, but just kind of like high level on a couple of these, right? When we think about list maintenance, we're thinking about data entered accurately, we're thinking about timely updates, and really we're thinking about compliance. And so I think about Eric a lot. I think about, for me, when I was working in Colorado and in Utah, because I was actually in Utah when Eric started. It was one of those things where there was, well, it wasn't a standard, it wasn't there wasn't like this strong enforcement, but there were certainly some requirements that regularly, monthly, my office had to be complying with or checking and updating the national change of address records that were coming, the Social Security death index, the looking for duplicates, removing felons, updating addresses, updating names, all those sorts of things. So an audit for accuracy is one thing, but also an audit for compliance. Our jurisdictions regularly updating their records with, whatever tool that they're using. Another one is ballot accounting, and I think there's just widespread agreement that this has to become a standard. It's simple on its face. I have a whole other presentation I do just on this one topic, but really it's about ways that we can verify the number of ballots that were accepted for counting equals the number of voters given credit for casting a ballot. And it includes all of our sort of chain of custody for ballots and equipment. So much I want to say about this, Judd. I'm going to just stop. This is a really important one. Mail ballot verification. This is the process used to verify that the individual who received an absentee or mail ballot is the same individual who completed it. And every state has different requirements for how they do that validation. The most common is signature matching, but certainly we've thought about some of the other requirements in terms of matching voters' SSN or DL or providing a witness signature and how you might go about auditing or verifying that. And I think it's really important. We focus so much on verifying the voter's signature or that returned ballots are from eligible voters. But it's equally important to verify that voter signatures aren't being rejected inappropriately, or an affidavit that is completed isn't being rejected for the wrong reasons. So there are benefits in doing audits like this, both in ensuring the integrity of the process, ensuring there isn't fraud being committed, but also we want to ensure all valid ballots are able to be accepted. And then tabulation, which we're all familiar with. Again, at its core, we need methods all throughout the process. So both in our testing, in our quality control measures, and finally in our audit to verify that the equipment was accurately programmed, ballots were interpreted correctly and tabulated correctly. The one area we still haven't tackled and that we've heard loud and clear from election officials is we need a better way to effectively communicate the results of your audit. This is an example of a handout that we produced at the elections group for communicating how logic and accuracy testing works. This is something we're going to be focusing on over the next year, is thinking about how to better communicate the results of those tests, those audits, those quality control measures to provide not just the evidence that the thing happened and got done, but help voters and other stakeholders make sense of it in a way that they can feel confident about that process. Okay, 4 sort of impactful things that we still need to consider, and that is determining a relevant sample size. I've asked the question many, many times to different groups, organizations, academics, what is adequate? And the answer is always the same, it depends. So there's an opportunity there for further research. Who validates an election? I think that's one area where we haven't found consensus yet, meaning who oversees the audit, who conducts the audit, and how might we reimagine the role of our Canvas boards? How might they play a role in validating our elections? How can we reimagine the role of observers? They play an important role, thinking about equipping them with the tools to better validate the things that they're seeing might be really important here and relevant. Thinking about how the intersection between audits and recounts. And then we really need to be thoughtful about our certification deadlines. If we're going to adopt an audit system and audit culture, election officials need time and space to conduct those reviews, those evaluations, conduct those audits prior to certification. Okay, so I promised you at the beginning that I was going to tell you how we could borrow ideas that are used in private businesses, manufacturing, and the military to improve the way we do elections. This is a snapshot of a B-1 bomber. Many, many years ago, I was assigned as a brand new airman to Dyess Air Force Base. I didn't know anything about my role, about how this aircraft operated, or all the things that were really necessary to supporting it. But my training had been rigorous in ensuring I knew that there were written standards, how to access those written standards, how to interpret those written standards, and that as I progressed in my job to ensure that I was complying with those, there would be regular tests, both of me, of the systems that I was supporting, and regular quality control checks, meaning someone from my squadron, someone from my unit would be periodically looking or inspecting to make sure that for my particular job, my particular support area, I was in compliance with those standards. I was doing the things required by regulation and policy and rule. And then what I loved about this environment was that regularly, once a year, once every few years, our entire wing would be tested. And I think about that in terms of like an audit or sort of national standards around audits, right? We would have folks independent from our unit, from our wing, come in, and everybody was evaluated no matter what their mission was to ensure, again, that they were in compliance with those standards, that the mission could function the way that it could. And what was great about it is, in some ways, having standards, having a way to test, will it work? Having a way to check compliance, is it working? Having a way to verify all those things were happening, in some ways made my job much easier. I think we're at this place, and I use this picture intentionally too, because if you fast forward some years, with all of those things under my belt, I had the opportunity to serve Hill Air Force Base in Utah, serve the F-16s, and having those standards, having those checks, ensuring that I could do my job well, actually allowed me to think outside the box, to think about ways to improve the things that we were doing already. And I was lucky enough that because of those sort of improvements and innovations, the Air Force gave me an incentive ride in one of these amazing jets. But it made me reflect on, sometimes we don't know the destination, and I think that's where we're at right now. But we do know the direction we should go, and I feel strongly that we've got unanimous support from local officials, state officials, policymakers, and others, that adopting a culture of audits is the next step in this journey for elections. And with that, I'm going to end.
All right, well, that's fantastic. Thank you very much, Jennifer. And we've gotten a lot of great questions. So let me kick us off with, and this won't surprise many of you who have listened to me before, but I'm interested in how can we take the information that you're discussing and make it public so as to help with some of the mis and disinformation we have about elections, and also emphasize to people how seriously we take trying to get it exactly right. Is the auditing culture that you're talking about translatable to a public that would interpret that information and maybe take it away and feel good about our elections?
So I don't think we're there yet. And I would point to the RLA reports, right, that you have on the Colorado Secretary of State's website. For folks like me, I can look at those and interpret those and know exactly what they're telling me happened. But I do think we need to do a better job of, so even if we changed nothing today, right, but we just took the audits that were already in place, we looked at those, we helped those jurisdictions that are already doing quality control measures, but we thought about a way to communicate to the public, whether that's a one-pager, a handout, some infographics, talking points that could not just show, here's the thing we did, here's the evidence that we did it correctly, and here's why it matters. And sometimes that's the piece that we're missing, is connecting, you know, here's why this tells you as the voter that the ballot was correctly printed, or our voter list is up to date. We don't have people that shouldn't be there, or we've made a very good, we've spent a lot of time going through that, right? The voter list is a tough one because, you know, it's organic, it's always changing, but, you know, regular practices, good list maintenance practices where there is some sort of verification, quality control checks, boy, we can say with a lot more confidence, we feel confident that only eligible voters are on this list. Same with the way that we sort of test and audit and think about our voting equipment, helping voters understand, okay, you took a random sample of ballots and you compared that against an outcome from the machine. What does that tell me, right? Why is that important? Why does that matter?
Yeah, exactly. I think that's true. And I plead guilty to the fact that our RLA, our risk limiting audit information on our website, is not all that decipherable. But then again, it's funny. We're speaking to two different audiences in many respects. You're talking to the public, but you're also talking to elections administrators, and often to your counties or to people that are conducting elections. And so that complicates how to communicate things like that.
And it's not to say that those reports aren't important. That is the evidence that the state, the jurisdictions performed that audit, and they performed it according to the standards for that audit. We like to think about it at the elections group. We've stolen a concept from the Center for Civic Design about a bite, snack, meal approach, right? And so there are certainly members of the public and others who need that meal. They need those spreadsheets. They need that data. They need to be able to look at that. And that's great. We don't want that to change. Some voters might only want a bite, right? Just give me a snippet of why this matters and I'm going to feel good about it. And then there's a space in the middle where we need to provide a little bit more info, a little bit more context. They don't need all the reports. But if they want the reports, they need to know they're there, and they need to know what they're telling, what those reports are saying about the election system that was tested or audited.
So let me go through some of the questions. First, we've gotten several questions about Eric, which I think is in the news, and then you mentioned it. Can you talk to us about where does Eric fit into the idea of checking your work, double checking what you get, getting additional information to help you make decisions? I mean, where does that fall in the continuum?
Yeah, so we have to have some source, right? And right now, what I've heard from folks, again, in many states, is ERIC is not just the best tool, it's the only tool we have right now, right? Where we're getting not just national change of address list, you can get that from other places. The Social Security Death Index, you can get that from other places. But information about voters who might be registered in other states, identifying duplicate voters, those sorts of things we're only getting from ERIC, and having a way, we can't audit or test that we're doing the thing if we don't have the vehicle, first of all, to do the thing, to do the list maintenance, right? So we've got to have principles or practices for list maintenance, a vehicle to do that. And I think, Judd, with a lot of these things I mentioned, some of these other audits and tests are also going to require some sort of technology in order to do them well, right? To make us more efficient at doing the practice to begin with, let alone coming in and like checking, are we complying? Are we accurate? I don't know if that was helpful.
Well, it is. And again, a couple of follow-ups on Eric. People are expressing concern if states leave, it becomes less effective. And
Sure.
If you're in one of those states that's left, what are you doing to fill that gap in terms of, again, trying to have data that audits what you have, but also adds to the information you have about your voters?
The only thing I'm going to say here is Utah. When I'm serving as an election official in Utah, we were one of the first members of ERIC. I thought we were doing a pretty good job just in my county of keeping our list up to date. When we got that first report, the number of duplicates in our system, the number of deceased voters in our system, really shocking to me were the number of voters that were registered in states, adjoining states, right? States in our sort of geographic area. That was shocking to me. It was also exciting that I felt so much more confident once we were a member and knew that we were regularly, not just once in a while, not just once a year, right, but regularly checking those. There is no other option to replace that right now. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think just to tie that one off, I think the interesting thing about ERIC is that it's that you can have incomplete records, you can have incorrect records. And because of the nature of the software, it can match your person and find that duplicate where a person has changed their last name because they've gotten married or they've had a life change. Mm-hmm. And because there's enough pieces of information, even if it's been keystroke entered incorrectly, you can still marry together files. And that's the thing that's so hard for an election official to do, because we just don't have the software, the ability, but ERIC does, and it can marry those files.
Yeah, and if I can just add one more thing, Judd, just to make sure people that aren't in an election office understand this, ERIC's not making those changes. ERIC is providing you data so that you and your staff can go, you said it, research, right? Yep. They're giving you more data so that you can go out and do research. And that can look differently in different places depending on what it is that you're researching. But there's just no other right now tool or organization or group that can provide that data to allow you to do that research.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, so some other questions. So Tim White from Washington, and I think I know who this Tim White is because there was an important Supreme Court decision out of Washington several years ago that Tim White was a litigant in. So I wonder if it's the same one. But he's asking a very interesting question, which is sort of post-audit. And that is that that there are laws in different states about what you do when a voter puts identifying information on their ballot. You know, what do you do with that ballot? Do you count it? Do you not count it? Can it be released to the public? Yes, no. I mean, it's all sorts of layers of how can you be publicly accountable and provide information to the public or count a ballot when you can after you've identified or have identifying information on that ballot. What do you think about that?
Yeah, well, I think that's a perfect example of a place where standards of practice could be super helpful, right? So in many states, when they come across a ballot like that, whether it's through just preparing them to be scanned or through the adjudication process, meaning it's been flagged maybe by the voting system, they have laws that allow them to take that and duplicate that or replicate that onto a ballot that right, is void of those marks. And we all, hopefully everybody's familiar with how the duplication or replication process works. But certainly in other states, if they've come across a ballot with identifying marks, you're done. It's just taken out. There's no remedy. There's no cure, for lack of a better word, to fix that. And so, yeah, I think, I know when I say standards, depending on the crowd I'm in front of, most of the time I get a cringe or a shudder, like we can't do that. You know, this would create some issues with states' rights, and I understand that, but I do think it's going to be really difficult if we want to have a good measurement of how we're performing as a nation in elections without some sort of basic standards. And it feels like to me in that particular case, that shouldn't be political, right? If there's a way to remove those, there's a way to count that ballot without identifying a voter, we should be doing that.
Yep. So here's a really interesting question about validating people and identity. So one of our questioners has asked, how do we as elections administrators confirm whether someone is a US citizen when they register to vote? And then is there a way that we can check it? You know, once somebody gets registered and they're a US citizen or not a US citizen, how can we check it when we send them a ballot? Can we check it when they're voting in person? I mean, what's the, you know, that seems like a really important thing to be able to audit.
Yeah, it is. We're getting, I think, better at that because a lot of registrations now are coming through driver's license, meaning they're having to produce those documents there at the driver's license agency. This is probably not a satisfying answer, but we also know, believe it or not, when people registering that box has been mistakenly checked, either by a technician or somebody else, that voter is usually the first to notify the election office, right? They don't want to jeopardize their path to citizenship. So they're usually the most upset when that happens. But yeah, that is actually one area, Judd. I don't know state to state how different offices are handling that, but there certainly are ways, whether it's through the DMV, through Social Security Administration, that we can verify that.
And more broadly on this idea of evaluating list maintenance, what can we do as elections administrators? What could a county do as in managing that process and auditing the day-to-day work of their team?
Yeah, so the first thing that I would recommend is having some sort of internal quality control. So first looking at the accuracy of the data. I mentioned like a bad keystroke, checking a box that somebody's an eligible citizen or not. Offices that will routinely sort of pull samples, and I know we did this in Arapahoe where we would just check the work of our data entry technicians to make sure, right? Were they spelling things correctly? Was the address correct? Was the party? That's a big one, right? Checking the wrong party can lead to all kinds of allegations or just create frustration and confusion. So just doing sort of basic checks for quality control. I think those sorts of things are best handled internally. I think in terms of like more like broad audits that might be done systematically, either with each election or whatever, I think there is where we're thinking more about compliance, right? So if we're getting those change of address updates, if those files are coming from the state, or the state provides the list of felons that need to be removed, or vital statistics gives you a list of deceased voters. I think in that case, the compliance audit is someone, maybe somebody external, which could be the state, could be a board, right? Just ensuring that that office is timely providing those, taking that data and making those updates or making those changes. Let me just add something here though. This is, again, I hate to like beat on the standards drum, but this is where standards again matter, because in some states, there is a requirement, right? That happens monthly. In other states, it might be quarterly. And in some states, it only happens once a year, right? So again, an audit is assessing something against a standard, a law, a practice, right? So if your law says, well, I only need to do that, I only need to check for duplicates or deceased voters once a year, and you're complying with that, have you met the criteria of your audit? Sure. Could more rigorous standards make that audit process more meaningful?
Yeah, that makes sense. I think folks from Colorado will know that I'm sort of the auditor. I don't know how I've inherited this job, but I get reports from our voter reg crew every month telling me who's ahead, who's behind, who hasn't done this work or that work. And then I get on the phone with them and say, hey, you haven't done, you haven't canceled people who died in the last 2 weeks. You need to do that, and that's sort of what you're describing. There needs to be some mechanism in place, even if it's sort of like human-based, to make sure that we can manage that work.
That's probably why the first time I came across a state that doesn't do that, I went, huh?
Yeah.
Doesn't everybody have a Judd that calls you to say, why, yes. Jennifer, why hasn't your team processed this list?
Everybody needs a Judd. That's a phrase that no one's ever said. All right. Well, we have like another 20 questions, but unfortunately we are at the end of our hour. Jennifer, is it okay if I point people to you if they have anything in particular they'd like to reach out to you about?
I would love that. Yeah, I would love that. Absolutely.
Am I also correct in saying that the slides you provided will be made available? I can send those out to the folks who signed up?
Yes, we will get you those.
Fantastic.
And as a reminder, this was just this was a bite of what we hope will be a delicious meal / report coming out, outlining all of these thoughts, our findings, our recommendations for how we might think about this going forward.
Yeah, that's great. Actually, a couple people asked about that. When is the report coming out? All that kind of stuff. Do you have
hopefully end of May? Should be on our website. Always check election line. We try to let Mindy know when we've got new things coming out.
Sounds good. All right. Well, thank you so much, Jennifer Morrell, who is the one of the co-founders of the election group, and the first call you make when you need an election person. That's certainly the first call I make. So thank you so much for your presentation today. It was really fantastic.
Thank you, Judd.
Okay, so let me remind you a little bit about our program here at the University of Minnesota at the Humphrey School of Public Affairs. We have the Certificate of Elections Administration. You can sign up for it or find out more information by going to ceaprogram@umn.edu. You'll see that it is a full certificate program that you can sign up for, or you can sign up for individual classes, as many of our students do. Jennifer teaches classes, I teach classes, and we have sort of a potpourri. There are people that sign up that want to get through the program, and then there are others that are just really interested in election security, in Jennifer's case, or election law, in my case. So we have, people from all walks of life who are, and from all over the country, by the way, who are signed up for the various classes. Also a reminder that we have 2 upcoming classes, one of which is taught by Jennifer. That's the Introduction to Election Security. That's starting on June 5th. Also, Gina Roberts from the Arizona Citizens Clean Elections Commission is teaching a class on voter outreach and participation. I have to tell you, Jennifer, I might sit in on hers because it sounds like a really interesting class. Not to in any way disparage election security, but I'm interested in what Gina has to say. I think that could be a good one.
I would love to sit in on that class.
I know, that's right. You hear these classes, you want to sit up. Okay, so, and then let me tell you about the upcoming conference on May 10th of this year. We're going to have a full-day conference on the profession of democracy, elections administration, and state associations. This is bringing together the idea of certification programs and state associations, making for a strong set of elections administrators who are skilled, educated, as well as have the infrastructure there to support them. So look for that. Please go to our website and find out more. And also, you can always Google HHHCEA. If you put that in, you're going to get it right away. It's going to be at the top of your Google search. All right. Well, thank you again for being here. We really appreciate it. There's some more places you can go. And a reminder that we do these every 2 months. We don't know who the next one will be, but it will be on June 7th. So mark your calendar for 11 a.m. Central Time on June 7th. And we'll see you then for another one of our webinars on elections administration. Thanks again. We'll see you soon.